Ms. Goodridge, please.
Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. I'm going to start out, Masha, I'm so sorry for the loss of your daughter, and you are wonderful for the support you're giving to your son in helping him find recovery. After 9 years of very marked change in addiction policy, where this Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, has decided to flood the streets with dangerous opioids and create... Mr. Chair, thank you. Can I have my time back? The witness had his mic not on mute. Thank you. So after 9 years of marked liberal policy changes in addiction, flooding the streets with dangerous opioids, and legalizing drugs like crack and heroin in British Columbia, normalizing drug use to a whole new generation, do you believe that has played a role in making your son have a harder time finding recovery from addiction?
The safe supply, as it's administered to him the last 2.5 years, has definitely played a role, because he's the word is diverting. Let's use the real word. It's called trafficking. I've had the police over to talk to him about what he's doing. He fears law enforcement enough that not wanting to go to jail. He doesn't have a criminal record. But yes, in my view and my lived experience, the safe supply in my son's case, because there's no treatment attached to it, it's just the doctor gives him all these pills, he diverts them, gets the drugs he needs, and he's still an addict. In my view, if he didn't have these pills and was receiving methadone, or if he was receiving his hydromorph under witness dosage and there was a treatment plan attached to it, I believe it would be successful. As it stands now, to me, it's not successful. It needs to be overhauled. There has to be regulatory oversight. You're flooding the market using taxpayers' dollars with lethal opiates that are making their way into high schools, adolescents paying up to $10 a pill for a hydromorphine. So how could this be helping us?
Well, I think that actually leads into my next question. Do you think that the government calling this safe supply and using that term and making it seem like these are somehow safe is a responsible word?
It's an unsafe supply, in my view, as a mother with a lived experience, observing how recovery care dispenses their safe supply. It's not safe. It's only safe if it's witnessed, or as the doctor here was in their clinic, where it's a witnessed or injectable dosage, then I'm all for it. But you need oversight. You need to be audited. You can't dispense these kind of drugs to addicts and expect them to take them as they're prescribed. Like, come on.
Well, and it's interesting. Do you believe that the government has effectively become the drug dealer in cases like your son's?
Well, let's see. The doctor's dispensing the hydromorphine pills by legislation. Federal government legislated. So you've got the federal government, you've got the doctors involved, you've got the pharmacies, and then you've got the street drug dealers. So I would have to say that at a higher level, yes, our Liberal government right now is acting like a drug lord, maybe. You know, here's your hydromorphine, the doctor gives it here, here's my son, and there's the street dealers. It's a chain, so yes.
It is terribly concerning. One of the things you said in your opening statement, you talked about how your son goes to this recovery clinic. You have to take him every single week, but all he gets is a script. He doesn't actually, and he does a drug test. He doesn't actually get any counseling. I went onto the recovery care website, and they talk about mental health. They seem to talk about the fact that this exists, but you're saying that in the 2 years your son has been part of this program, he hasn't received mental health support. Is that correct?
No, the only thing when I have faxed in letters to Dr. Bro, or the few times my son allowed me to go in to talk to him, my son comes home with a sheaf of photocopied anything anybody could access, Narcotics Anonymous, mental health crisis line, suicide line. It's almost an affront to me as a taxpayer and a mother of an addict, because I know they're getting this funding. Are you telling me that with your $10 million plus you can't have an extra counselor in your clinic on site? None of the things that they claim in their website, in my experience, over 3 years, have ever been realized with my
has
son.
he actually received, to your knowledge, counseling from a counselor at Recovery Care Clinic?
No.
Has he ever received virtual counseling from a counselor associated with Recovery Care Clinic, to your knowledge?
I think once. The counselor's name is Jimmy. My daughter had the same one, even though she was at a different Recovery Care Clinic location. Jimmy was the counselor across all 4 clinics, and because this was COVID, initially with COVID, it was all virtual. So my son, when he did agree early on into the program, before the Safe Supply kicked in, early on into the program, he agreed to speak to, because as his parents, we were giving him ultimatums. If you don't get counseling, we're going to have to, we're trying to leverage, some sort of consequences. He spoke to Jimmy once. The second appointment, Jimmy dropped it, and the third appointment, my son dropped it, and that was it.
That's incredibly troubling. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, Ms. Krupp, I want to acknowledge also sending my condolences to you for the loss of your daughter, and also I want to thank you for and commend you for your courage in supporting your son and your advocacy. It's all of our job to help support your son, and that's the goal of this committee and this study, is to provide recommendations to keep him alive and a pathway to a better life. Now, you talked about drug replacement therapy having its place. Can you speak about the place that you would like to see it play? You
mean the safe supply, yes. How the hydromorphine is being dispensed?
Yes.
Well, I would like to, from my lived experience, I'm hearing all these answers to questions and long-winded, and, I can appreciate it, but I want to know how many people in here, in this committee and live, have lived what I have lived through. You can talk about references. I point to the Alberta model only because we're desperate as parents to find something that will save his life. They're monitored. We need something monitored. We can't be dispensing drugs that are making their way to the streets. It's a currency for drug addicts and people like my son. This hydromorphine is a currency unless it's strictly regulated, perhaps in a pharmacy setting, perhaps in a setting like the doctor here talked about, but it cannot be given to them 28 pills at a time every day for them to go and trade them for street drugs. You're defeating the purpose of safe supply.
Do you feel that the provincial government in Ontario is doing enough to support people struggling, the Conservative government there, in this toxic drug crisis that we're facing right now?
I don't know very much about what's going on in Ontario. I've been more focused on Ottawa, but from what I've learned today from Dr. Davila, I would have to say the clinics that she's talking about, I would look at bringing my son there because it's witness dosage. Maybe that'll help. I want to get him away from where he can sell. The only other option I have is call the police and put him in jail, and that's not an option. I want to get him away from where he is not diverting his safe supply. Plus all the other patients I see. These people are homeless and marginalized, but they deserve treatment, not selling their stuff and walking around in a daze and collapsing on the sidewalk. 12 blocks from here. Any of you members could go down and walk and see what I see every Friday.
Yeah.
Something has to be done, and I'm not sure which, I don't want to politicize it either, but what I'm hearing today gives me a bit of hope from Dr. Davila. I'm talking with what I've seen, some change, something has to be done. You're just producing more addicts. You're introducing hydromorphine into the high schools. That's a fact. And if everybody's okay with that, then let's not politicize it. Let's just pretend everything's A-okay.
Well, thank you again for your courage in fighting for your son.
Overall, I'll go to Mrs. Krupp. Again, your comment regarding safe supply. We heard from the parents of Brianna McDonald a couple weeks ago. That was a 13-year-old that died by overdose alone and in a homeless encampment. Their powerful testimony include the following quote: "The words safe and drugs don't belong in the same sentence." Would you agree with that?
I would most definitely agree with that.
How old was your daughter when she died?
My daughter was 46.
How old is your son today?
He's 30.
Do you believe that the federal government has fooled people into believing opioids and other drugs are safe based on marketing of harm reduction programs?
I believe that there needs to be an education for sure. I mean, I had to educate myself on safe supply, methadone, like things like methadone has a half-life, the recommended doses when you're starting a program. In my daughter's case, the doctor started her off on 30, and yet the literature I reviewed across Canada and the States, including all the medical associations, recommend 10 to 20 dosage. He started her at 30, didn't do an opiate tolerance test. There's all kinds of things that parents need to be aware of. And in terms of Brianna, the tragedy there is beyond me. A 13-year-old, the fact that the parents couldn't get her the help that they desperately tried to. Their hands are tied by policies, by legislation, by the ignorance of the general. You have to be living it daily. Like, let me tell you how I spent my Sunday.
Just one sec. I just want to get this online. Have you witnessed safe supply being diverted into the hands of children?
Not children, adolescents.
Teens?
Teens, once, downtown.
Downtown.
They knocked on our car window. My son had just gotten in from his Friday visit, and the boy looked to be about 19. Tapped on the window. I said to my son, lower it, and he asked for hydromorphine, begged for 2 pills. He said, I'll give you $20. And, I said, I'm really sorry, you can go to the clinic, and we drove off. Okay. That's right, just blocks away from here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Group. Thank you, Mr. Doherty. Next, Mr. Moore, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Krupp, the term safe supply or safer supply, as the previous speaker said, conservatives didn't invent that term, but it is through the listening to those with lived experience like yourself that we're seeing the evidence of this approach being anything but safe. So when I hear your description of your son's experience and your experience, nothing about it sounds safe. Nothing about it sounds safer. You referred to his so-called safe supply as a currency, and about the now prevalence in high school, the diversion and the lack of traceability on this so-called safe or safer supply. So can you comment a bit on that? Because one of you, in your opening remarks, you mentioned that your son is still using crack cocaine, fentanyl, so is still using these hard drugs while diverting his safer supply. So what about this, in your opinion, is safe?
Well, I'm going to just point to my experience, lived experience with my son. I don't see anything safe about it. How could it be called safe supply when 3+ years later, he's still going to the clinic, he's still seeing the same doctor, all he's dropped is his methadone, and he's done that himself, when I think his methadone never should have been dropped, because the methadone has to be, according to what I've read, you can't drop the methadone if they're into fentanyl still. So all that to say, 3+ years later, he's getting his methadone, he's getting his Dilaudid. The Dilaudid is a means of currency for him to continue using crack cocaine. So it's not safe because he's still using unsafe street drugs. That right there, the whole purpose of the Safer Supply program was to divert addicts from using harmful street drugs. Well, that's not happening in my experience. not only is he continuing to use harmful street drugs, the safe supply that he's being administered every day by a doctor is making its way where it should not be, which is in the skate parks. My son was a skateboarder. Skate parks, adolescents, and they have money to buy these pure hydromorphins. So I cannot call this safe. Otherwise, my son's results would be different. We're not talking about a month or 30 days. We're talking about 3.5 years. So there's your experiment of our lived experience of safer supply. Take it for, and it's certainly evidence-based. It's certainly fact-based.
Thank you. Professor Fallu made the remark that nothing has changed in the last decade. In fact, there's been tremendous changes in law. I'm thinking specifically about the current Liberal government's Bill C-5, which now allows those that are importing, exporting, and producing, such as in a meth lab, Schedule 1, the most serious drugs, to not serve any time in prison, but to have house arrest, which puts them back into the community. Your evidence about your son being able to obtain these drugs, what message do you think it sends to young people if there's no consequence for someone who's running a meth lab or importing cocaine into our country, and all the while, as you described it, the federal government is handing out this so-called safe supply?
Well, I wasn't aware of the finer points of C5, so thank you for that. I'm going to educate myself on that. There have been changes. In fact, methadone was I want to bring that because I know the doctor said methadone was highly regulated by Health Canada up until I think 2015 or 2016. So in terms of these, why all of a sudden can everybody dispense methadone at any clinic? Clinic, a doctor killed my daughter who wasn't trained to dispense methadone. That's a fact. In terms of house arrest, that's the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard. In other words, you can come and produce crack and whatever. You can be a liberal and a progressive country, but you cannot. Hard drug use is not normal. It shouldn't be encouraged to be normal. It should be treated, and it should be pointed to recovery. My son doesn't want to be a drug addict. He doesn't want to use methadone or crack or fentanyl. He wants to be normal. But he's an addict, and we have tried to get him the help. And yes, it is very nuanced, as the doctor has said. I think overall, first of all, if you're producing drugs and selling them on the street, you go to jail. That sends a message. Or maybe perhaps people have to start a vigilante thing, and we'll take care of the drug dealers as parents.
Well, unfortunately...
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Thank you, Ms. Group.
Dr. Ellis.
Dr. Ellis, please.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks everybody for being here. Just a couple of comments, if I might. First of all, Mr. Fallu talked about depoliticizing this situation. I would draw everybody's attention to a social media post in May talking that, as it says here, hey everyone, at Pierre Poilievre is a hashtag public danger. He is way more toxic for society than all drugs. That doesn't sound like depoliticizing this incredibly important debate to me. That being said, Mrs. Krupp, thank you very much for your testimony. I had a chance to read it, and I really appreciate you being here, and apologize for not being able to be here right away. We talked a little bit about methadone and, of course, the tragedy that happened in your family related to methadone. And I once was a family physician and had a license to prescribe methadone, and at that time it was necessary to prove the competence as a prescriber before you were allowed to prescribe methadone. In my reading, those regulations changed in 2017. And in your mind, if that regulation continued to exist, would that have changed the outcome in your family if you had a competent prescriber?
If those regulations were in place, I believe most certainly my daughter would have been alive, because the physicians that were dispensing prior to 2017 had to be trained. Now they are not. For example, Recovery Care has 4 clinics across Ottawa. Guess how many doctors have the certificate for addictions? 1, Dr. Charles Burrow. All the other doctors at all the other locations, including the one that my daughter went to, none of them have addictions training.
Those comments, of course, are very, very concerning, and I think it's something that this committee needs to take into consideration as we draft recommendations around how things need to change in the future.